welcome to the opening edition of the Mint Build Business series. We're going to be talking through this series to a number of CEOs and business leaders and really trying to get to how they're building their businesses, indeed rebuilding their businesses, and in some cases reimagining their businesses and architecting them to success for 2021 and beyond. Let's say for the next decade. What will it take for companies to keep winning in the market? What will be different? How is the post-COVID era, if I may call it that, fingers crossed, play out? We've been doing a ton of research on this in our Edge Insights practice. And what we found is that the digital transformation story in India has now evolved into business transformation. Companies are doing things fundamentally different and looking to build different capabilities. We see companies building platforms. On those platforms, they're creating ecosystems. Through those ecosystems, they're building partnerships and really reimagining operating and business models. And this is creating a whole different paradigm of competition, whole different levels of profitability, and completely new dimensions of growth. But at the core of all of this really is good old-fashioned leadership as the underlying pillar of success. And that leadership is leading to new types of corporate cultures that are enabling companies to not just embrace digital, but make it inherent in their philosophy, in their approach, in the way of doing business. So for the opening episode today, I couldn't be luckier than to have two leaders who are leading, dare I say, rocket ship companies, but who are also folks who've actually lived in different types of ecosystems, both on the buy side and the sell side, and who've seen the world from both sides, as consumers of technology and now as business leaders in the tech industry itself. Arundhati Bhattacharya, formerly of the State Bank of India, then an advisor to several large investment firms on the boards of several companies, and now CEO of Salesforce India. Welcome to the Mint Build Business series, ma'am. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
I've also got, of course, Puneet Chandok with me from Amazon Web Services, consultant and a McKinsey partner for several years, an IBMer before that, and again, someone who's lived and worked in different parts of the world and seen the ecosystem of technology through different dimensions. And today, of course, they respectively lead Amazon Web Services as well as Salesforce. And who could be better to tell us a little bit about what's happening as the world moves from digital transformation to business transformation? Arundhati, if I may start with you, ma'am. How is the world looking from your cockpit?
It's looking pretty challenging, but of course, it's also looking full of opportunities. I think one of the things that the CEOs have really and truly now understood is that, this is a different world where there are 2 or 3 things that have become absolutely important. The first, I would say, is, they have understood that it is a world where you should be able to work from anywhere. The second thing that I think they also have realized is that they need to own their customers. The customers really have to be owned and have to be available omni-channel. That is, the connect with them has to be made omni-channel. And the third and the last thing I think that they realize very much is the need for agility and nimbleness. The ability to change tracks very, very quickly. Because if you remember when the first shutdown happened, many people either had to close down because they didn't have the ability to go remote, but the ones that kept operating were the ones that were able to go remote within such a short period of time. So I think these 3 realizations are there with almost 100% of the CEOs. And what these 3 realizations in turn are driving is the need for not only digital transformation, but as you say, business transformation. How do they transform their business so as to be able to cater to these 3 needs?
How interesting. Puneet, work from anywhere, really drive a digital culture. What's the experience been at Amazon Web Services, both within the organization and of course, when you're working with your customer?
First of all, Jaideep and Arundhati, thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. It's also a special conversation, Arundhati, because AWS and Salesforce have a global partnership for the last many years. And last month, we announced an expansion to make it even easier for our customers to work together, both with AWS and Salesforce. So delighted to be here. I agree with the point, Jaideep, you made and then Arundhati made, right? And you said things are fundamentally different. Arundhati spoke about omni-channel customers, owning the customers, work from anywhere, agility. I think just to add to this, there are three things that at least I'm picking up as I talk to CEOs and leaders in India. I think the first is, I think CEOs and leaders in India have realized that technology and cloud react well to uncertainty, right? COVID was a bit of a dress rehearsal for the new world that we're entering, which is going to be more dynamic and volatile than ever. And in this world, technology and cloud is a friend that you need, right? You don't want to be carrying technical debt that'll slow you down. And to Arundhati's point, I think people have also realized that digital transformation or business transformation with a start and a finish line doesn't make sense. It's a way of life. You have to constantly invent and reinvent, right? So it's not a project, it's not an initiative, it's a way of life. I think the other thing that's changed is, and I call this speed is the new cost, which is conversations on digital are now becoming very real. And we're seeing urgency like never before, right? Digital ideas used to be post-its and then pilots, but now it's become a question of survival, right? And digital roadmaps are being built in months and weeks, and it's really heartening to see that. And then the last thing is what you said, Jaideep, which is there's a realization that digital transformation is mostly about leadership, not about technology. The biggest challenge, for example, the biggest challenge on moving to the cloud is not technology, right? I mean, AWS has more services to build pretty much any application and run any application on the cloud. I think the challenge is resistance to change. The challenge is the fear of the unknown. And that's where leadership really comes in, right? And the difference between organizations that are able to do it and the organizations that are slower is leadership commitment, culture, focus on customers, to Arundhati's point, and then constantly thinking about speed and experimenting. I think that's what's making the difference.
Puneet, I was just reading a McKinsey study that says that while 80% of businesses have undertaken digital transformation, only 3% have finished it. And they are saying that 3% are the 3% who are led by CEOs who are passionately involved in this and fully committed to that digital transformation. So what you're saying about the CEO's role, the importance of that, I fully agree with that.
I couldn't agree more with you, Arundhati, which is that it goes back to leadership commitment. It goes back to building a culture where, because a lot of these technologies are also new, right? So this is not like buying technology 20 years ago. The underlying technology, the platforms are evolving, right? So you have to have the ability to experiment, try things. Some things will work, some things will need more work. As a leader, you have to lead that change from the front. And if you're not doing it, then it's very hard. Then you're just fighting gravity and dipping your toes in water, and it's very hard to get anything done, as you know.
So let me just kind of peel the covers back a little bit on this. Right? So it's I think we'll all violently agree, and I'm sure most of our viewers will agree, that leadership is at the point. But Arundhati, if I may turn to you again to start, how does this actually manifest? So when you talk about the leaders being intrinsically involved, so when you think about your own organization, and indeed when you're working with so many clients and customers that Salesforce has, and indeed put on your previous hat as well, what is it that you would do, and what would you advise some of our viewers? So let's say the top 2 or 3 things that you do to make sure that the message that there is no plan B, that this is a way of life, goes through right to the frontline workers from the bottom.
So, I think one of the biggest things that we need is complete buy-in. And getting that buy-in is always not very easy, because if I go back to my earlier organization, it's easier to give examples there. When I first talked about the digital agenda, a lot of people came to me and said that we already have internet banking and mobile banking. What is the digital agenda that you're talking about? What's different about digital? So, it was really a difficult job trying to explain to them what is different. So I did 2 things, I think, and I think both were both really had its impact. One was I created these, what I call the in-touch branches. So we created them in malls, only 7 of them, and these were absolutely branches that looked entirely different. So it had a front space which had the ATM and the cash deposit machine and the check deposit machine and a multi-function kiosk and a passbook printer, and this was open 24/7. Okay, so self-service 24/7. If you go inside, there were very large screens, and on those screens you could play around, with wanting a car loan, wanting a housing loan. Say you want a car loan, it'll ask you whether you want a used car or a new car. It'll ask you for the budget. It'll show you all the models within that budget. And thereafter, it'll tell you what the manufacturer is saying about it, what social media is saying about it. And you can really dig in deep, and then it'll ask you that if you really want to get this, do you think you need a loan? If you need a loan, again, a few questions, 5 or 6 questions, and it will then tell you what's your eligibility. So, those are the kinds of things, and this entire branch, we sub-branded it as InTouch because it was mainly touch screens all over. It had workstations like your Star Trek. Okay, it had little cubicles where you could go in and interact on the screen with experts regarding your investment goals or loans or whatever. And the people inside, there were only 3 people, okay, dressed very casually in absolutely, what should I say, youngsters' clothes, not the typical oldster clothes. And
walking into the branch.
Yeah, and the thing is, you could open an account over there in 20 minutes flat if you had your Aadhaar number and were willing to scan your finger and put your Aadhaar number down, and then get a customized debit card printed at the branch and walk out of the branch with a debit card in 20 minutes time. Now, and I created these in the malls because I wanted not only our customers to visit with their families, I wanted our own people to visit with their families, because the rank and file needed to understand what the branches of the future could look like. Okay, so that was one thing that I did. And the other thing for the top management, what I did was I created these offsites where we brought in, the top IT companies as well as the top consultants to tell them exactly what was happening in the world outside, and then actually flew down the entire team to Bangalore, where I had somebody like iSprit actually curate a number of fintechs to come and show to us what they were doing. And believe me, after seeing all of that, I think the aha moment was there with everybody. So you really need to create that buy-in. If you don't have that buy-in,
both ends of the spectrum I can see.
Absolutely.
Customer-led. Puneet, let me come to you. In terms of, AWS works with literally thousands of startups, and now hundreds and hundreds of larger so-called legacy companies as well. I prefer to call them traditional companies, by the way. What is you seeing, at some of your customers in terms of what measures they are taking to drive this message that this is the new way of life? What does leadership look like there? And indeed, in AWS itself, how are you propagating the message?
First of all, Arundhati, love the story, especially the InTouch branch story. It was so compelling. And this is exactly what it is, right? Sometimes you have to show the art of the possible to your customers and to your teams and drive change. I think there are 2-3 things, Jaideep, that I'm picking up, building on what Arundhati said. One, there's a customer of mine, a CEO, who basically says, I don't want to do technology for the sake of technology. Tell me the wildly important problems for the business, and then tell me how technology can solve for them. Right? And there's a client of mine who used to joke that I don't want to do any more pilots because we have more pilots flying around than Lufthansa. Every pilot is successful, but nothing happens. Right? So unless you have a wildly important problem for the business, don't do technology for the sake of technology. Solve real customer problems, business problems. Second, I see some of these companies, to Arundhati's point, hire a different breed of talent, or really think about skilling and capability building exactly the way you described, Arundhati, in a very different way, right? You need builders who are willing to challenge the status quo. They can cut the hand that feeds them. They can really use the platforms. They're not into falling into that trap of not invented here syndrome. They can go and use the best of breed solutions and then orchestrate it. The real skill is orchestrating a lot of these technologies, not building them. And then third is, I think, just the culture of experimentation, right? If you're afraid of failure, then this world will be difficult for you, and you have to lead from the front, and you have to allow some of those things, right? So at AWS, Jaideep, just to give you an example, we're India's most comprehensive, broadly adopted cloud platform with hundreds of thousands of customers, which are startups, digital businesses, enterprises, SMBs. But 90% of what we have built, and we have 200 plus services, is driven by what customers told us. We're not inventing. We call ourselves inventors, innovators, but we're not inventing just for the sake of it, just because tech is cool. We're inventing because we're reading between the lines and we're trying to do what is the right thing for the customer. And if you do that, then typically you get it right most times.
I think just distilling what both of you have said, the dominant theme is that there are 2 key stakeholders. One is create the pull from your customer perspective. And the second is make sure that the message goes to the employees with all these various projects and sort of tricks, or not tricks is a terrible word, but all these initiatives that you put in place to really drive the message home that this is a way of life going forward. And I think the other thing that I'll pick up on, from what you said, so important, our research that we've done also tells us this, that CEOs need to be very tolerant of failure, right? And they need to understand that there are learning loops. When we talk about failure, the other side of the coin is the learning loop. So how do we keep improving? Which brings me to the final chapter of my talk today, or my line of questioning, as it were. This whole notion of failure is being taboo in corporate, right? And whether it's a startup or it's an enterprise company or across the board, when you read about stuff happening in Silicon Valley, for example, failure is celebrated. Founders who failed actually get funding much more easily a second time, and so on. Now there are companies who are kind of embracing this culture and making sure that the learning loops are incorporated. So I'd love to get a sense that, when you look at some of the work that you folks are doing with your respective customers, is there anything that comes out which tells you, okay, that we are evolving along this critical dimension, that we understand the culture of innovation? And the culture of innovation, a big part of that is also the culture of failure, and also, of course, the culture of success. Goes without it. Puneet, maybe I can ask you to go first on this. If there's any example which comes to mind, or even within AWS, you mentioned 200 odd services. I'm sure many more fail. But what happens next?
So a couple of things, Jaideep, on this, right? One, and if I go back to Amazon, our mental model of innovation is very simple. It requires two things: the ability to try a lot of experiments and not have to live with the collateral damage of failure. So lots of experiments, and then being okay with failure and almost celebrating it once in a while, right? So those are the two things. And this ability to experiment and this ability to try things quickly, build quickly, test, iterate on results, learn and pivot is at the heart of innovation that's happening. And the other point I'll make is, in my life in technology, I've been here for 20 years, I haven't seen a bigger tool for driving innovation than cloud. It's the biggest enabler for innovation I've seen, because it does three things. One, it reduces the cost of curiosity. It makes curiosity really actionable, right? Which allows you to come up with new ideas much more quickly. Because imagine everybody in your organization can slice and dice data when they want to, in the form they want to. That just allows you to be a lot more curious and actionable. Second, it allows you to make your ideas into products and services dramatically faster, right? Because you don't have to wait for 3 or 4 months to buy servers and write code and all of that stuff. You can do a plug and play. And by the way, if the experiment doesn't work, the cost is much lower because you can scale down. Third, it allows you to go scale and go global in minutes, right? And that's a part of these platforms and ecosystem that you spoke about, right? So if you bring all of this together, and if the cost of failure is not too much and you have the permission to fail, I think you can drive innovation at scale.
So I know, Arundhati, you're also very passionate about the whole notion of the cloud being a digital enabler and in fact, a digital platform. So, we are flat out of time. So let me come to you almost from a closing perspective, right? So I'm sure you agree with what Puneet says, but there's also the dimension of regulation, data management, privacy. And I think it's fair to say the regulators are still learning. And inevitably, the technology industry keeps racing ahead and kind of almost pulling regulation with them. What's your experience been? First of all, would you agree with what Puneet said? Any other commentary on that? And secondly, on the notion of regulation and engaging with those folks to keep the policies up to date. Over to you.
No, I think, failure is something that you have to risk. When I talked about the 7 branches, for instance, we didn't roll out more than 7 because we found they were expensive and they weren't making that much of money. So what we did was, out of those 7, we took out the most useful ones and the ones that were most used. And the subsequent branches were much smaller, but they rolled out the initiatives that were really useful. And therefore, those were far more profitable. So you've got to test things out. You've got to fail fast and recover fast and go ahead again quickly. But in respect of the cloud, I fully agree with what Puneet says. Cloud gives you an ability to be elastic about your business. You can scale up, you can scale down. It gives you the agility and the nimbleness to be able to, pivot very, very quickly. And that, I think, is very important. Now, what has happened in regulation? I'm not saying that regulation is very far behind. Regulators are nowhere saying don't use cloud. Okay, but regulators being regulators, they are not going to mandate cloud usage either. Okay, they will say that, yeah, go ahead with cloud, but be secure. Now, once you say that, you need the risk appetite of the CEO to say, fine, regulation isn't stopping me, so let me take that risk and see what happens. And that is very important, and that is where I find that, at least in India, and especially I will say in the public space, that is the state-owned enterprises, the PSUs, the PSBs, I find that the risk appetite is not big enough. I think, there they need to really go out and experiment and understand what is it that cloud gives you. The notions that they have about the security of cloud is really, about 7-8 years old. Since then, things have really, really progressed. Frankly speaking, if you have on-prem, all that you're doing is really ensuring the physical security. The logical security is still at risk. And not only that, in respect of the cloud, say for instance AWS manages the data of hundreds and thousands of clients. So they actually monitor the entire world to see if there are any incidents happening anywhere. And any incident will automatically trigger a response from them to make sure that their cloud doesn't get impacted the same way. You can't do that for on-prem. It's impossible to monitor every global incident. And therefore, overall, if you look at it, the amount that goes into creating the security layers on the cloud today is far more than what you can do on-prem. But the mindset isn't changing. The mindset needs to change. People need to really go into this and understand that things have moved, things have changed. They need to apply themselves to see what are the changes and then take calls.
Wonderful. I think many conversations that I've also had with CIOs, I've always said to them that if you believe that your security is better than that of any of the tech hyperscalers or the tech giants, then that's a very, very bold statement to make, right? And I said, even if you have this whole notion of physical security, go and visit the data center locations, go and visit the points of presence. You will feel much more at peace. But I think, as you rightly say, a lot of it is about mindset. So you can't really address an emotion with logic. So over time, hopefully, it'll fade away. Both of you have given us some really good food for thought. The notion of the CEO as the digital leader, driving change from the perspective of making the digital manifestation of the business visible to customers, to opening up the digital manifestation of the business to the frontline team members, associates, employees, and I dare say I'll add my own thing to that, your partners, right, your distribution partners and so on. And then of course, both of you spoke about how you make it visible also to the board members and the senior leadership, where I dare say the resistance traditionally has been the most. And I dare say in India at least has been a function of age to some extent, though now of course it's falling away. I think it's fair to say as we close that, tragic as the whole, last 18 months have been as a public healthcare crisis, one of the very faint silver linings has been that it has triggered a modernization of business across the world. And talking about it from an India perspective, both of you talk about work from anywhere, the ability to engage customers and consumers digitally, the boom in e-commerce, all of these things in a sense have been a good outcome. Though I'm sure we would have gotten there anyway without this horrible toll that COVID has extracted of society. And I think the takeaway that I have, and I'm sure many of our viewers have, is that while all of this newfangled technology will keep evolving, good old leadership and driving corporate culture is still at the heart of business success. Arundhati Bhattacharya, thank you very much. Puneet Chandok, thank you very, very much. It's been a real pleasure talking to both of you today, and I really appreciate your time. And with that, we conclude the first episode of the Mint Build Business series and look forward to welcoming you for many, many more. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaideep, and thank you, Arundhati.
Thank you.
Really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
the conversation.
Thank you.
Fascinating discussion.
Thank you.